Hi guys, this lesson is lesson 6 in the second unit polynomials, and we'll be covering decomposition. When decomposition is essentially factoring simple trinomials but with a coefficient in front of a. And we essentially break down the middle term into two other terms. Okay, so let's rewind. So a simple trinomial that we learned last lesson takes in the form x squared plus bx plus c, where the coefficient in front of x squared is 1 or -1. But now we're doing complex trinomials. We're decomposing complex trinomials, meaning that the a value, which is the value that the coefficient in front of x squared, will be any number. It can be 2, 3, -3, 4, or -5, -10, doesn't matter. You know my point. Okay. So now, before we actually get into how to decompose, we have to actually know how to factor by grouping. So, as I said earlier, decomposition involves involves breaking down the middle term, bx. So this bx becomes two terms. Okay, that bx becomes two terms. So we will end up with something like ax squared plus yx plus mx equals c, or in y and m here are the two terms that can that replace b. Okay, so how do you even factor when you're given four terms? Because we have not learned how to factor with four terms yet. We've only learned how to common factor with three terms. But how do you do with four terms? Well, that's when you use grouping. Grouping is when we essentially factor out the GCF for two terms only, and there's a different factor that we take out for the other two terms. So let's take a look here. So we have an example here. X squared plus 3x plus 2x plus 6. So the bx term breaks down into 2 and 3. Okay, so which means that the original b term would be 5. So the original equation is x squared plus 5x plus 6, and the b term decomposes into 3 and 2. So this is what we have. So how do we go from here? So we take a look at the first two terms, x squared and 3x. So we can common factor out from these two terms x. So it becomes x bracket x plus 3, close brackets. Okay, and the same thing we do to 2x and 6. We can factor out the 2, so it becomes 2x plus 3. Okay, so our goal here is to get two identical brackets. Okay, so from the common factor we've factored out for these two sets of terms, we want to achieve a pair of identical brackets. In this case, it's x plus 3. Once we've got those two identical brackets, we just essentially combine these two brackets into one bracket. And then the remaining terms, which are x and 2, are combined into another bracket. So this would be our final answer. Okay, so now you've known how to group. So now we will go to actually learn how to decompose. So we have a complex trinomial in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so we're doing the same thing as factoring in the last lesson. We have two numbers that also multiply to something and also add to something. But this time, instead of only multiplying to c, we're actually getting two terms that actually multiply to ac. So two terms that multiply to a times c. Okay, and two terms that add to b, that remains the same. Okay, and from there we can call these two terms y and z, and then we replace these y and z terms for b. So we plug in y, so ax squared plus yx plus zx plus c when the variable is x, right? So we essentially replace these two factors into the b. Okay, the b term, the b number. All right, so let's look at a done example. We have 3m squared plus 10m plus 8. So we want two numbers that multiply to a times c, which is 3 times 8, which is 24, and two terms that add to the middle term, which add to 10. Okay, so those two terms will be 6 and 4, and we can replace 6 and 4 into the 10. So it becomes 3m squared plus 6m plus 4m plus 8. From here we group. For this bracket, we can just factor out the 3. So it becomes 3m, m plus 2. For this bracket, for this set, we can just factor out 4. So it becomes 4m plus 2. Now we have two identical brackets. Combine them to one, then the remaining terms becomes the other bracket. So this is your final answer. Okay, so let's actually look at some examples. We have 8k squared minus 16k plus 6. So now, what two terms multiply to a times c? So a times c is 48, and which two terms add to the b term, which is negative 16. Okay, so the two terms can be 12 and 4. Negative 12 and negative 4. Okay, because negative 12 times negative 4 is 48, and negative 12 plus negative 4 is negative 16. Okay, so here we plug in these two values to replace b. So 8k squared minus 12k minus 4, actually you can switch it around, minus 4k minus 12k plus 6. Okay, the arrangement of these two doesn't really matter. You can switch them around, but it will keep the same answer anyways. Okay, so now we have four terms. To group it, the first two terms, we can just factor out 4k. That gives us 2k minus 1. And for this bracket, we can factor out negative 6, which gives us 2k minus 1. We have two identical brackets here, so we can just combine them into one. And then the rest, we can just make them into another bracket. Okay, that's your final answer. Okay, next question. So again, two terms that multiply to AC, which is 6. No, actually, for some bigger numbers like this, when we have big numbers, a big product like 6 times 12, then you will always common factor. You would always try to common factor out first before you decompose. But it would you don't have to, but it will give you the same answer. Like if you try to decompose it with 6 and 12 as your product, then it will give you the same answer if you factor out or not. But I want to factor out to keep the expression as simple as possible. All right, so I will recommend, very highly recommend, for you to try to common factor out an expression before decomposing. Okay, so for this one, you can see that we can actually common factor out 2. So that becomes 3m squared minus 7m minus 6. Okay, so now we're left with a very simple, very easy trinomial. It's still complex trinomial, but still it's more easy than this original one, right? As I said, you can still decompose with this one. It's perfectly fine, but I want to factor out the 2 to keep it more, like the numbers more small. Okay, so now two terms that multiply to AC, negative 6 times 3 is negative 18. Two terms that add to the middle term, which is a negative 7. And now that will give you negative 9 and 2, because negative 9 times 2 is negative 18, negative 9 plus 2 is negative 7. Okay, and then from here you can just replace those two numbers into this negative 7. So minus 9 plus 2m minus 6. Okay, from here you also you just group it. So here you can common factor out the 3m, right? That gives you m minus 3. And then here you can also common factor out the 2, which is m, which gives you m minus 3 also. Alright. So now we have two identical brackets. You can just group them into one. And then the remaining terms becomes another bracket. Boom. This would be your final answer. Okay? So even if you don't if you don't common factor before you decompose, you'll be left with something like this. Okay, which is technically the same answer, but you still have to move this out of the bracket. You would still have to factor this bracket out. So you can just factor the negative. You can factor out the 2, and then that gives you the same answer, right? So you're gonna have to common factor anyways, but I like to do it. But like it doesn't really matter, right? Because you would end up with the same answer, but for if you don't factor out at the start, then you have to factor out at the end. Okay, you have to take out the 2 at the end anyways. Okay, so on to a sort of shape question. So here it gives you the area of this rectangle equals 6x squared plus 13x minus 8, and it's asked for the length and width. So what does this question even ask us? It's asking us for the length and width, but we know that the area equals to length times width, right? And the length and width are just essentially just two brackets, right? Are just two brackets multiplied to each other, which resembles what? Resembles factoring, right? So essentially, we just factor out this whole expression to obtain two brackets, which are the length and width. Okay? So now we factor this. 6x squared plus 13x minus 8. So we can't common factor here. However, it's so we just have to deal with it, the big number. That'll be negative 48, 8 times c, and the b term will be 13. Okay, so yeah, it's gonna take some time to find out the factors. I'm also taking some time to find out the factors as well. It's gonna take a pretty long time, especially for these numbers. So that's why I said you guys have to essentially common factor out. You guys should prioritize common factoring out an expression. Okay, so I hope you guys have the numbers. It's going to be 16 and 3. More precisely, negative 3 and 16. Okay, so now we just plug this into the b value. Just like essentially replace it by negative 3 and 16. Okay, so that just becomes 6x squared minus 3x plus 16x minus 8, and then from here we factor out this group. From this bracket we factor out 3, which gives us 2x squared. Actually, we factor out 3x. and that gives us 2x minus 1. From this bracket, we factor out 2, so that gives you, no, we factor out 8, which gives you 2x minus 1. We have identical brackets, so we make a bracket, we combine that, and then we have the remaining terms, 3x plus 8, which becomes the other bracket. This will be your final answer, and we can just assign the length or width. So this would be width times length, okay? So one of these brackets would be width, and the other one would be length. It doesn't matter which one you choose, but logically the length should be larger. So this bracket is larger. So we can say that length equals 3x plus 8, and width equals 2x minus 1. So that will be your answer. But it doesn't really matter which one you choose, W or L, to assign to these brackets. But I chose length as the bigger one.